Hey guys, how's it going? So, no face again today because I need to see the computer screen so we can talk about this poem that you had for homework yesterday. Really quickly, most of you did pretty well with this. Got pretty close to what I actually wanted for the assignment, but I'm going to walk through it and show you exactly what I wanted because there were a higher number than I would have liked who kind of missed what I was asking for or were really confused by it. If you're still confused about a lot of those poetry terms, go back and watch yesterday's video, look at that link I sent. Those things should clear up your questions, but I'm going to walk us through this poem today, and then I'm going to go over the last 10 words of Unit 12 vocab for us. Oops. All right. So, Fire and Ice by Robert Frost, obviously. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. All right, so I'm not worried about meaning necessarily today. I'm not going to talk about that because that would take a while. But we're talking about rhyme scheme, meter, number of stanzas, and number of lines. Okay, so when I ask you about number of stanzas, that's the first and most obvious question here. These lines are all together. They're not separated out into individual paragraphs. So if I talk about stanzas, type in one-handed, so bear with me. We have one, okay? One stanza. So how many lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, pretty simple again. This is just getting you to recognize the overall structure of a poem. This kind of thing is so simple. I'm not going to ask you about stanzas and lines for more than a few more days. By the way, I'm not going to record this one for a grade. I used it for attendance, but enough people would have done poorly on it if I graded it on correctness that I'm just not doing that. So sorry for those of you who did well on it. Some of you gave me more information than I asked for. Like some of you told me that this was a Spenserian stanza of the type used by Edmund Spenser in his famous work, The Fairy Queen, which is something that I'm almost certain you looked up or were told by a parent because that is way beyond anything that I've taught you. You don't have to give me stuff like that. Like if you want to, sure, great. But don't feel like you have to go way above and beyond. You just have to give me the things I've asked you for, and I'll be happy. All right, so as far as rhyme scheme, let's look at this. Rhyme scheme. Now, some of you wanted to list off words that rhymed with one another. Like some of you would say like fire, desire, ice, twice, things like that. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the pattern here. Okay, so I'm going to go out to the side of each line and type it. So fire is our first end rhyme sound. So we give that a capital A. Okay, ice is our next one. It does not rhyme with fire, so we give it the next letter of the alphabet, a B. Desire is our next one. That rhymes with A. So we go back to, or it rhymes with fire, I'm sorry. So we go back to A. Fire again, obviously rhymes with itself, so it gets an A. Twice, that rhymes with ice from earlier, so that also gets a B. Hate, this is a completely new sound. We haven't seen this yet. Doesn't rhyme with ice, doesn't rhyme with fire, so it's a C. Ice again, obviously rhymes with itself, so that's a B. Great, great rhymes with hate, so that is a C. And then suffice, some of you might have said suffice, and you would have been a little bit confused, but the word is pronounced suffice, and that's a B. Suffice means be good enough. So if I say for lunch, a sandwich will suffice, I mean a sandwich will be good enough. All right, so our rhyme scheme then is AB, AAB, CB, CB, okay, which is a pretty simple rhyme scheme. So A, and this is how you would type this out. And forgive me if I make any typos while typing one-handed and trying to hold a camera. Yep, there's definitely not a V in that. All right, so AB, AAB, CB, CB. Nothing too complicated, only 3 separate end line sounds. Starts off ABA, that's a pretty simple start. CB, CB at the end is a very simple ending. The only thing even slightly out of the ordinary is that we've got that doubled A line in between a set of Bs. But it's a pretty standard rhyme scheme. That's pretty simple. And that's how I want you to do something like that. So this is 3 parts of that homework from yesterday. The only thing left is going to be meter. So this is pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, especially stanzas and lines. Like I said, rhyme scheme, if you need to go through and type out on your phone or something those end line sounds in a row so that you can tell what they are, and then you just type them out in a row like this, that's fine with me. If you put commas or spaces or anything like that, that's fine too. But exactly like I've done it there is good enough for me. It would make me happy. It would get 100. All right, so meter. A lot of you messaged me yesterday and were like, hey, I don't get what meter is. Some of you messaged me immediately after and were like, oh, I didn't notice the video. I'll go watch that first. So meter is simply the number of syllables per line. Okay, so an individual line's meter is its number of syllables. Now, we're not worried about individual lines meters, though. We're worried about meter for an entire poem or for a stanza of a poem, something like that. We're worried about a pattern with the meter, kind of like with the rhyme scheme, right? So what you do is you count the number of syllables per line. If you don't know how to count syllables, stick your hand under your chin, and when you say a word, the number of times your chin drops is the number of syllables in the word. So some, say, the, world, will, end, in, fire. 8 words, all of them are a single syllable. If you say that through with me with your hand under your chin, trust me, I had it under there, I know you can't see, your chin will drop 8 times on that line. So this line is 8 syllables long. Some say in ice, okay? You just have to trust me, that one's 4. 4 words, all single syllables. So that so far is not a pattern, and it's not a consistent meter. From what I've tasted of desire, you'll just have to trust me, I've gone through and counted these and I know this poem pretty well. All of these longer lines are 8, okay? Pretty consistently, this poem goes around 8 syllables. Now, then this was a little bit more complicated. Some of you were like, well, I got 2 numbers. And yes, you should have, because the 3 short lines in this poem have 4, the longer ones have 8. If you had told me 8 syllables per line or tetrameter, I would have given it to you. Tetrameter is the term for 8 syllables per line. You don't have to know that. You don't have to tell me anything like, oh, this is in pentameter or trimeter or anything like that. That's more than I'm asking you for. So don't worry about doing anything like that. You can just tell me 8 syllables per line, or you could tell me 8 syllables, mostly 4 on a few, like 4 syllables. Oh my gosh, I cannot type one-handed. Sorry, guys. All right, so 4 syllables on a few. Something like that would have been perfect. If you had just said 8 syllables, it would have been fine. If you just said 8 and 4, that would have been fine. On anything like this where you've got multiple, you probably want to tell me both. Like it's usually 8, but sometimes 4, something like that. If it was just 8 all the way down, obviously 8 syllables per line. If it alternated, if it was like 8, 4, 8, 4, 8, 4, you would tell me like 8, 8, 4 alternating or something like that. Or 8 on the odd lines, 4 on the even. Any way that you want to phrase that such that I can see that you understood the lengths of each line is fine. Now, what I don't want you to do is go 8, 4, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 4, 4, because that's not necessarily useful to me. It's just lengths of each line by themselves. I want to see if you can recognize patterns in the meter, which there is one here. 8, 4, 8, 8, 8, 8, 4, 4. It's just the way that he's got it set up. It's a pretty simple meter, pretty consistent as well. So this poem structurally is pretty simple. Like I said, it's not, A, B, A, B, just 4 lines of, 6 syllables per line or something like that. I could have given you a really, really easy one, but I wanted to challenge you a bit. We're not going to do another one today, just because I want to let this sink in. If you're confused about how I got any of this stuff about this one, because when I ask you to do a poetry analysis at the structural level, this is basically what I'm looking for. I'd like you to, type it out like this, space it out, and format it pretty much this way. Okay. And I don't think there's anything terribly complicated about that. Like I said, meter is the hardest part. I'm going to be pretty generous on meter. Like I said, if someone had just told me 8 syllables per line or 8 and 4, like if you just literally typed 8 space AND space 4, I would have given you credit if I were taking this one for a grade. So don't get too worked up over it. And rhyme scheme, I'll be lenient on that occasionally too. Like if you miss one rhyme or you get a letter wrong, I'm not going to yell at you. I just want you to be able to recognize the patterns in these things and recognize kind of the formal aspects that make up poetry. All right, so I've used enough time on that. With that said, you can ignore the screen for the rest of the video. I'm going to go over the last 10 Unit 12 vocab words. I'll try to make this fairly quick. Somebody yelled at me for having the video over 15 minutes yesterday, so thanks. You know who you are. All right, so word 11 is intensive. Something that's intensive is really deep and focused. It's concentrated. So if you're glaring with an intensive look at your test paper, that means you're really focused on it. You're in deep thought. Okay, so that's an adjective, pretty easy word to use. Think of the word intense. That's kind of what this is. It's a descriptor. It's an adjective that you would use to describe someone who's looking at something with in an intense way. You would say their look was intensive. You've heard of intensive care in a hospital. That means deep, thorough, concentrated care, like someone's in bad shape. Word 12 is maneuver. So maneuver can be a noun or a verb. So as a noun, it's a movement that you make, usually one that's been planned, like You might say he executed the blah, blah, blah maneuver to fool his opponent. As a verb, it's to carry out the movement itself. So you might say he maneuvered to the south side of the building, as in he moved around to the south side of the building. This is often used in like talking about things like military conflict and stuff like that. You might say they maneuvered the troops to the east of their opponents, or up on top of the ridge, or something like that. Pretty easy word to use. I would probably use it as a verb, but it's fine as a noun as well. Word 13 is sabotage. To sabotage is to take an action to destroy something. So if I plant bombs on my enemy's supplies, I'm sabotaging them. As a noun, it's the actual action itself. So you might say, I committed sabotage on my enemy's supplies. That would be using it as a noun. This is another one that's probably easier as a verb, but still a pretty familiar word you should know. Word 14 is scant. So scant's an adjective that means you don't have enough of something. So if I say, I have scant food to last out this pandemic, which isn't true, I'm fine. But if I said I have scant food to last out this pandemic, I'm saying I have not quite enough food. Like I'm bad off. I don't have enough of it. If you said I have scant money to purchase a new car, you would mean I don't have enough money. Word 15 is stealthy. This is also an adjective. This is one you should know. Stealthy is something that's sneaky. It's not easy to spot. So if you hunt, you might say as a hunter you need to be stealthy so that what you're hunting doesn't spot you. You might say a ninja should be stealthy so that they don't get spotted by their enemies, things like that. Pretty easy word. Strapping, word 16. This is an old-fashioned word that you won't hear much anymore. Even like your grandparents and great-grandparents probably don't use this word. So this is just a word that means someone who's strong, healthy, usually tall. So if you think of like a big, burly young man, like a lumberjack type, I think we had the word burly a couple units ago. But that type, you would call them strapping. Someone who looks strong and healthy and like they could eat a horse and then, lift a tree out of the ground. That's a strapping person. You usually hear this as part of the phrase like strapping young man in old-fashioned literature, or if someone's trying to be goofy. So this is one I'd put an asterisk by just because we never really hear it anymore. But it's pretty easy to use as long as you're familiar with it. It's always an adjective. Word 17 is strident. Strident's also an adjective. This is not a very nice word to use to describe someone else. If someone has a really high-pitched, annoying laugh that you just absolutely hate to hear, you would say they have a strident laugh. It's something that sounds unpleasant. It's harsh. It hurts your ears. It makes you want to plug your ears up. That would be what strident means. If someone has a strident singing voice, you wouldn't pay to go hear them sing in a concert. Pretty easy word again if you know how to use it. Just think of something that you don't like the sound of, like fingernails scratching on chalkboard is a strident sound. Always use it as an adjective. Word 18 is thrive. Thrive's a verb. It means to grow, usually to grow very well. Like if I say the plants thrived in the sunlight, it means they grew well. They got bigger, they didn't have any struggles. They thrived. If I said he thrived in his new class because he really liked the teacher, that means that he's doing really well in it. He's not struggling in it. He's growing. He's learning. This is a verb, again, pretty simple. And you hear it a lot of the times with plants and things or animals, something that's growing up. But it can also be figurative, like he thrived in his new job, something like that. Pretty easy word. Word 19 is titanic. So something titanic is something that's huge. It's massive. It's usually considered powerful. You've probably heard of the ship, the Titanic, the movie from the 90s with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet is pretty famous. It's about that ship that was so massive that everyone talked about how it was the biggest ship ever. It couldn't be sunk. And of course, it hit an iceberg and ended up sinking. But think of the Titanic when you talk about the adjective Titanic. The Titanic was Titanic. It was a Titanic ship. So Titanic is, again, it's an adjective. You might say that NFL offensive lineman is a Titanic human being. All right, word 20 is valiant. So valiant is a word you would use to describe someone who's heroic, someone like a knight or maybe a soldier or something like that. It means someone who's really brave, who's bold, who's not afraid of anything. This is, again, an adjective. We've got a lot of adjectives in this unit. So you might say the valiant knight slew the dragon, or the valiant man rushed into the fire to save the children. And pretty much always going to use it to describe someone doing something heroic like that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be with something that's risking their life. It could be something a little bit more tame. But this is a pretty positive, strong word regarding someone's bravery. All right, and that brings us just about to 15 minutes. If you have any questions about the poem or any of those vocab words, let me know. Do synonyms and antonyms today. We'll do completing the sentence and get back to some more poetry tomorrow. See you guys.